in Tanya that that I highlight. It's not literally, but in my mind, there's lines in Tanya that are highlighted for me. And today's Tanya portion begins with one of those highlighted lines, right? So, is there Tanya real quick? Whatever, I know this one pretty much by heart. So, the Alter Rebbe is speaking about what's called the Ava.
Another room there might be, but they're not good Tanyas.
All Tanyas are good Tanyas.
No, it's phony issues. You never can find where you are now. You have to find.
Oh my goodness!
Somebody, whoever designed it, came from a different planet.
Really? Okay.
The regular old Tanya, not Tanya.
Oh, that's a good Tanya. You like the regular old Tanya.
Same with the Shiur. Same with the Shiur.
I'm with you on the Sidurim thing. But you know what? I'll tell you the truth. With the new Sidurim, I'm finally able to somewhat identify with people who are new to davening and they are very confused with the Siddur and they have trouble finding the place, right? And I never really had that issue because, you open a Siddur and you know exactly where you are, right? It's like somebody can blindfold you and take off your blindfold in the middle of your house. You know where you are and you know where to go, right? But in the case of this is the kind you don't like, right? Okay. It's okay. But so the same thing with the Siddur. You drop me anywhere in the Siddur, and I know exactly where I am and where I want to go, right? Along comes the new Siddur. Well, for people who are not familiar with the Siddur, if the davening is something new in their routine in life, right? So they're lost. They need to be guided. They need to, numbers and page numbers and so on and so forth. So I didn't have that experience in my own personal life, or Hashem, thanks to my parents who brought me up very wonderfully. But when this new Siddur came out, I was like, oh, now I know how they feel. I'm lost. Drop me in the new Siddur. I got to start looking. Where is this? Where am I? It's not an instant automatic recognition. Anyway, so I guess the same as with the Tanya. As a matter of fact, I'm using here the new edition of the Alter Rebbe Shochet, which is amazing. It's the first new edition since the very first Alter Rebbe Shochet was printed. So this came out some 20 years ago or so, I'm not even sure. Totally, completely redone with footnotes, which for me personally is amazing. It's just amazing work. My father-in-law, Olav Shalom, would not refuse to use it. He would not use this new Shochet. The same reason. He was very familiar with the old one, and he opened the page. He knew where he was. He knew where he wanted to go, right? But I'm not my father-in-law in that respect, and I like this. I like this new Shochet. It's absolutely. It's amazing. Okay. So
the footnotes are not quite different from what it was in the original.
These are new footnotes. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. The originals are very few. And they're primarily from the Ma'aril. The Ma'aril is the Alter Rebbe's brother. No, I'm sorry. The footnotes have from the Shara Koilo, if I'm not mistaken. And the references on the original Tanya was, I believe, from the Shara Koilo. Oh, I'm not even sure. But bottom line, no, this is completely new footnotes, and very, very good job. Anyway, so in the Tanya that we've been learning the last few days, the Alter Rebbe speaks about this Ava Misoteres. So Ava Misoteres means the love. The word Misoteres means that it's an innate love that every Jew, just because of by mere virtue of the fact that he's Jewish, and he has it in his genes, so to speak, he has a love of Hashem, okay? A natural love of Hashem. Alter Rebbe compares it to the love that a child will have for a parent, okay? It's natural. It's not necessarily a love that is created by an appreciation or by some degree of acknowledging whatever your parents have provided for you, etc., right? No, it's innate. It's an innate love. So there's an innate love that every Jew has for Hashem. But the word that the Alter Rebbe uses is misoteres. It's hidden. Why is it hidden? And this is because, unfortunately, our consciousness represents a very superficial level of our existence, of who and what we are. If we were really to step back and examine our own consciousness, right, we'll discover that it is to a great extent influenced by our environment, our peers, who we socialize with, who we interact with, and so on and so forth. It's mostly reactionary. Well, I don't know if it's mostly or not, but whatever. And by the way, just by the mere fact that you could say that a person is capable of stepping back and examining his consciousness, right? His thoughts, his feelings, his experiences, his reaction to all these experiences. The fact that you're able to step aside and look at them and examine them, right, is amazing, right? And it itself is a testimony that we're dealing, that our very consciousness. When I say consciousness, I mean it in a very broad sense. All of our experience, everything that we live with, day to day, right, is to some degree very superficial. It's very superficial, and therefore we actually have control over it. We can change it. We can do with it as we choose. We just need to choose. Okay, and I mean, psychologists know this, right? That's the whole school of therapy and psychology is based on this notion, right? And then there's a very specialized field in psychology called mindfulness, which is basically stepping out of your consciousness and looking at it from the outside, right? Which is, from what I have heard, a little bit that I've read, is an extremely, extremely successful therapy for some very serious disorders. Okay. Anyway, so the Alter Rebbe is telling us, right, that we have this Haomer5781Rabbi. We're perhaps consciously unaware of it. We can even be in denial of it. Okay, but it's absolute. And the words that the Alter Rebbe begins in today's Tanya. Now that the Alter Rebbe is telling us about this Ava that we all have, right, and what we're supposed to think, the process that we're supposed to go through, right, by actually taking control of our consciousness and focusing and aiming it in a certain direction, right, will actually develop this Av, right? The problem is, how do I know? Maybe that itself is superficial. I was just influenced by the Alter Rebbe, Shochet. He's telling me about all this Ava, right? And it's an Haomer5781Rabbi that's there, right? And he told me what I should focus on and what I should contemplate and what kind of meditations I should have in order for that Ava to blossom, right? And then at the end of the day, I say, well, one second, maybe that's just some kind of a trick that's going on, right? Maybe it's just a mental trick that the Alter Rebbe got me swept into, right? So the Alter Rebbe says, even if it seems to you, that it's only your imagination. There are things that we conjure in our imagination and they become very real to us, right? My daughter Bracha is an expert at this. She lives in an imaginary world and it's totally real to her. She's constantly interacting, talking, conversations. She sits in bed before she goes to sleep at night. She's literally living in this fantasy world where she's carrying on conversations and so on and so forth. We're all capable of that, right? Says the Alter Rebbe. Even if you assume this is just merely your imagination, says the Alter Rebbe, don't worry. Because I promise you, it's emes la'amita, it's absolutely real. Now, of course, this takes a certain element of faith, right? And Emunah. But that's basically the foundation of everything. Have Emunah, that you have that Abba, and the Emunah will be strong enough for you to accept it as being absolute and real. Guess what?
It is real.
You manipulated it or you didn't, but the bottom line, it is absolute. It is real. Okay. So it does all go back to Emunah. That's true, but I don't care. That's fine. I don't mind that Emunah is the foundation for everything, all of reality, etc., right? And even the way I react to my experiences, if it's guided by Emunah and I'm feeling this love, and the Alter Rebbe tells me that it's real, and I'm saying, nah, I'm not good enough. That I have to. I'm just a regular shmo, right? No, says Alter Rebbe. No. You actually got in touch with something that is absolutely totally real. Well, that was today's Tanya. but I think today we're supposed to be learning.
Hey, Rabbi,
Yes.
you
Oh
know,
yeah, look at that. This
Lord
thing is
knows,
talking to me. I have 3 people here sitting here. None of them open their mouth. They're all sitting very obediently and listening to every word I say. And all of a sudden, this screen starts talking to me. Yes.
if you get, 5 minutes a day, that you can actually get to your that reality that you are doing really well. Sometimes when you learn this, and you go, oh my God, I'm nowhere near there. But if you go back and say, hey, wait, that's 6 hours ago for 5 minutes, I actually believe that you're doing really well.
Yeah, I like the way you said that. You didn't say I actually experienced it. I actually believed it, right? And the Alter Rebbe says that already you touched the real. You touched the ultimate. Okay.
Belief.
Yeah. The Alter Rebbe is very, very liberal in this regard, right? He gives us a lot of leeway. He understands us very well. He knows the doubts that we have about ourselves, right? And yet the Alter Rebbe assures us that even if you just say it, right? At that moment that you were saying it, and you might assume that was a very external and a superficial moment, says the Alter Rebbe, I'm promising you, I'm telling you, that was your moment.
That's a magic moment.
Magic moment, the moment of real, that you've touched with the finite, somehow found a bridge with the infinite.
Nice.
Okay?
Good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Parsha, so I'm going to get, again, like I said, we're doing, I should do the Parsha. Okay, so I'm going to do just some random thoughts, okay? Because there were some conversations that took place this week on my family WhatsApp. My daughter, teaches, and when she has questions, she brings it up. And some of my other very wise children, right? So the question that came up when my daughter in Detroit was preparing for one of her classes is that we know, the Gemara tells us that Mashiach is the Chivra Devei Rabbi. He was the white one, was what Chivra literally means, but Chivra is a reference to the leper. He was a Metzorah of the house of Rabbi. Okay, so this is this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha is Tazria-Metzorah, and mostly Parshas Metzorah deals with the situation where a person has been afflicted with this thing called Sefiras. Okay, in English we call it a leper. And the laws of Sefiras are very, very severe, because once a person is determined to be a Metzorah, he must separate himself from society, right, and go through a process of purification. Okay. So just like I said, a couple of random thoughts that I hope you'll appreciate. I have a pet peeve when it comes to certain translations. Okay, and while I'm learning Chumash, and I learn Chumash, on my phone, so it has translation right there on the site from Chabad.org, and Tumah is continuously, it's always being translated as unclean. Unclean. And I don't like that. I don't like that unclean. I mean, it's only words. It's all semantics. That's true. But words, they have meaning. There's association, right? And when we think of unclean, we think unclean, soiled, you're playing out in the mud, and you came in the house and you made the carpet all dirty, right? And now it's not clean. I got to call the carpet cleaner to clean my car, right? And I really don't like that. I don't think the term clean or unclean should be the proper translation for Tumah or Tahara. Okay. Would you like to suggest a better translation?
Would it be better to say connected and unconnected?
That would be great. Okay. But the problem is that you're not allowed to do that because you're way too abstract. You're being way too abstract, which is good for people that like to think in the abstract. I like to think in the abstract. But and if that's what you would tell me, if that's your choice, that would be perfect. That would be perfect. I would love it. But for most people, they need something a little bit more mamashas, a little more concrete. Problem is when you get a little bit too concrete, like clean and unclean. Okay, so let's find some middle ground. Okay, so I think the best would be pure and impure. right? It's not too abstract because even olive oil could be pure or impure. I don't want to say olive oil is connected or unconnected, right? Although if you're really abstract, you probably can find a way of working that in too, right? But at least pure and impure, it's got enough of some sense of a real word, right? Something concrete, but at the same time, it leaves itself open for a more abstract understanding. And indeed, we are dealing with the very abstract because the whole idea of Tumah Tahira is only abstract. It only exists in the spiritual sense.
But Tumah doesn't connote unclean?
There you go. There you go again. There you go. Impure, not unclean. Because you're not soiled, you're not dirty, you're just
Tumah
impure.
is not soiled?
No, Tumah means impure. Now, when we say impure, by the way, I want to disassociate the word impure from cleanliness. And I'll tell you why. Because we're dealing now, all the laws of Tumah and Torah, even though the Torah is such a great percent of what the Torah discusses, right? And as far as mitzvahs and mitzvahs asay and mitzvahs loisasay have to do with the dinam of Tumah and Tahira, right? But at the same time, Tumah and Tahira is almost purely in the realm of what's it called of study, right? It has nowadays almost no practical application. Okay,
is it more or less just ritually?
Well, yeah, that would be a good word to add to it. Ritually pure or impure. So not olive oil, pure virgin olive oil. It's ritual purity or ritual impurity, which again, as I just began saying, has almost zero relevance. What would be the relevance of Tumah Tahira? Whether you could go into the Bais Hamikdash, right? And even just be present in the Bais Hamikdash, which, by the way, is also to some great degree irrelevant because you only had to go to the Bais Hamikdash 3 times a year, right? So the rest of the year, it didn't matter if you were Tameh or Tahar. Now, it does matter. I'm not saying it's totally relevant.
Can we include klipa also? It's a relevant term.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, you see, klipa for the sake of semantics, okay. Klipa is actually the least abstract of terms, right? Klipa means a shell, right? But here, a funny thing happens in semantics. That's the idea.
It's much more than
that's my point. My point is that sometimes the less abstract of a term, right? It almost screams out to you that, hey, I don't mean a shell, I mean some abstract idea, right? So klipa, in a sense, is the most concrete of terms. I don't know if the word concrete is the right word of it. It's the most like apple peel, a nut shell, right? That's what klipa means. Klipa means shell. But because it is so, what's the word? So mamushes. So, right? It almost, when we're using it, especially in the context where we use klipa, the shalish klipas atmeis, and so on and so forth, it's like the word itself is already saying to us, hey, guess what? I am a concept, not a shell. Shell is just a word that uses to help me relate to that concept.
But when I was taught Tanya, klipa became like the lowest thing, the worst thing in the world.
Impure.
It became like
not dirty, not unclean. Impure. Let's stick with impure, please.
It's not.
Stay with me.
Context that we were taught was that it's deplorable. Disgusting.
Oh yeah, you're using other words now, which are fine. These are different words. Deplorable and disgusting are more conceptual words. That's okay. Rather than just unclean. Unclean could be conceptual, but it's usually not. Okay. I would prefer pure and impure, and if you want to call it deplorable and so on, that's fine. Okay, but you have to understand that it's a term that's a reference to a spiritual state. Okay, it's a purely spiritual state. Now, let's go back to the idea of Tumah Tahira. It's an impure spiritual state, but you know what? It's perfectly fine to be in that state. You don't have to be pure. Just only 3 times a year. When do you have to purify yourself and go to the mikveh? In preparation for going to the Bais Hamikdash, right? If, let's say, you were halakhically excused from going to the Bais Hamikdash, then there's no reason even for you to have to go through a purification process. Okay. Now is relevant to a Kohen. Kohen is a completely different story, right? And it's also relevant, when it comes to eating, Trumas and so on and so forth. Meiser, not an issue, and that's why anybody can actually eat Meiser, but mostly for Kohen. So they eat, and that even applies today, because a Kohen, for example, doesn't go to a funeral because a Kohen has to maintain a state of purity. Now, it's impossible for him to stay in all states of purity. That's what's interesting. Purity is not just one thing, and there are degrees of it. No, there's different kinds of tumah. So you could be tummy for this, but tahar for this. Whatever. It's a little complicated. But so therefore, a kohen, I'm tummy, right? But at the same time, I cannot subject myself to another exposure to tumah by being in contact with a not live person. Okay.
There is a relevance to that in terms of
okay. Now, by the way, yes, but that's a completely different section of Shochet. Okay, it's a different section. So it's about the intimacy between a husband and a wife. She's in a state of nida, which is a state of impurity in reference to the kachim, in reference to going to Bais Medrash, etc. Right? But it has a whole separate element as far as the restriction on the intimacy between a husband and a wife. Okay, and again, your wife, when she is in that state of nida, is not unclean. She's not unclean. She's got the kitchen is sparkling, and her clothing are sparkling, and everything about her is perfectly 100% beautiful and radiant, and she's not unclean. Don't call her unclean.
What does the Alter tell us to think in order to appreciate?
That's just a
he goes to great lengths to put it in.
No, it doesn't go to such great. He doesn't go to such great lengths. But yes, that's just tool. That's just a tool. That's just a tool.
Right, it is a tool, but it's a tool to impress upon us what he wants us, how he wants us to conceive of him.
Okay, but my point is that I still am going to prefer pure and impure, even in reference to a woman when she's in a state of nida. Okay, she's not. I shouldn't use that word. I don't like the word unclean, and this is a perfect example. Like you tell your wife you're unclean. What do you mean I'm unclean? I'm cleaner than you. You got your dirty socks sitting right over there, right? They never made it to the hamper. You calling me unclean? Who's unclean over here? Right? I'm not unclean. I'm impure. Okay, which is like you pointed out. It's a ritual state. It's a spiritual state, right? Now, what does it mean, right, that a person is impure? Basically, the lesson is that it is perfectly fine to be in this state. There's nothing wrong. There's no obligation to take yourself out of that state, except when you're going to be in the presence of Hashem. You're going to be in the presence of Hashem, right? Now you have to take it up a whole new level. You come into the Bais Medrash. It's not enough to just, clean, Baruch Hashem, you're clean. But there's a degree of purity that's required for this special occasion, being in the presence of Hashem. Okay? And I would say, this thought just came to me this moment, that even in the reference of Hilchos Nida, right? The bond and the union between a husband and a wife is very unique and very special. It's almost like you're going into the Bais Hamikdash again. These are words that I just come up with right now. Okay, I'm not quoting anybody on this, but it's certainly true that this bond is very unique, and it's supposed to be a holy bond, right? There's a certain kedusha. Guess what? We are now entering into a state, a union that is very, very unique. It's very holy. It's even fragile. Right? And guess what? For this, you got to up the ante. Now you have to be in a state which is not commonly necessary, right? But for this, like you're going in the Bais Hamikdash, you got to be pure. You got to be completely tahor. Likewise. Anyway, if you like, you can quote me on that. But I just came up with that idea.
We all day long we're doing things for tahara. You get up in the morning, you can't walk.
Yeah.
Dalit Amos until you wash your hands.
Right.
It's
very
good.
good. Yes.
You wash to eat.
Right. But it doesn't
say a bracha.
that is yes.
Rambam says you have to
Beautiful.
wash.
Beautiful.
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 I mean, we do
Yes.
things all day long about Tahara and Tumah.
Okay, so let me point out something important. Okay, you are right, but every one of those things that you mentioned are all midrabanan. They're all rabbinic. Okay.
So
What's the
you don't have to
point?
do it?
What did the
So you
Chachamim
don't
want?
have to do it?
What did the Chachamim want? I'll tell you what the Chachamim wanted. I'll give you, I'll give you a proof to it from Shulchan Aruch. Okay, hold on. Hold on. In the times of the Bais Hamikdash, it was very clear. There is my everyday routine, right? I don't want to call it mundane, but because a Jewish person should always have Kedusha in his life, right? But you do not have to be at that level of this purity, okay? It's something that's reserved for special moments when you go into the Bais Hamikdash. Now, the Bais Hamikdash was real. So a person always knew that there's going to be situations, especially I'm obligated to go to the Bais Hamikdash. Chayav adam lehitar. A person has to purify himself with enough time so that he's pure when he has to go
So
to
was the wrong?
Listen.
Rabbanim
Listen,
real?
hold on, I didn't finish. Right? We don't have the Bais Hamikdash today, right? So we don't have those moments where we're going to have to go up the, go up a level, right? Because now I'm going into the presence of Hashem, right? We don't have those moments. What did the Chachamim do? These all happened post Churban. They said, you know what, we're going to put a lot of things into our daily routine to remind us of what it means that there are moments where you have to you have to elevate yourself to a otherwise unrequired. Got it? Now, what's the proof? What am I basing this on? The whole idea of washing for Hamaitzi, for example, right? It's a very strange ritual that doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense, right? The whole idea of washing for Hamaitzi is that if you happen to be a kohen, okay, and there is truma in your house, because kohanim would have truma around, right? Truma must be eaten in that pure state of tumah, of tahira, right? It's one of those things where the kohen the kohen being was this individual who also didn't always have to be tahar, but he had to be a lot more tahar than the common people, because he was supposedly the person that is always in the presence of Hashem. He's representing Hashem, right? So he always had to be in that state of tahira. The kohen, got it? What happens if you eat truma chas v'sholem b'tumah? It's a very serious offense, right? Now he's got truma in his house. What a little bit of truma, whatever, fell in with the regular bread, right? Oy. So the Chachamim decided, okay, we got to do something to make the person extra special, careful. You're going to declare a whole new kind of a tumah called tumas yadayim, and we're going to make you wash those yadayim so that you're conscious and you're aware about what you're about to touch or what you're about to eat, right? Do you wash before you eat bread? But you're not a kohen, are you? Kohen?
No.
Kohen, right? I should be the only one who washes.
And
And there's no Bais Hamikdash, but there could be truma. Truma, there could be, right? It would only be truma there, but whatever. But there could be truma, and you cannot eat it. Cannot eat truma. That's why today, when we are separated the truma, it's already by definition tummy the minute it became truma, right? Because we're all tummy. So because truma doesn't have an actual shiur from the Torah, right? The Chachamim actually instituted that it has to be at least about 2%, let's say, right? Approximately, depending on what you're capable of. So 2% goes for God. Nowadays, though, that the truma is actually not being used, right? So what we reverted back to the basic obligation. Mashu, whatever you do, truma, that's it. The rest of it is free to eat now because I took off the truma. What I took one bean out of a whole bushel, right? That's what we do today. For truma, we take off one mashu and then we wrap it and we burn it, right? We get rid of it because it's truma that's tummy. Now let eat it, right? Anyway, how do we get into this? So the kohen has this the washing. If you look at the very beginning of Hilchos Netilas Yadayim, the Seudah, the washing for a Seudah is basically, it's what's it called? It's only something we do today. I'm not even a kohen. There's no Tumah in Pittsburgh usually, in Eretz maybe, but not here, generally speaking, right? So why are we washing before we eat bread? And it's such an established ritual, right? Everybody knows. You go to somebody's house, you're invited as a guest for Shabbos. Part of the ritual is going to be that we're all going to go and wash our hands, right? And put your ring, if you're a woman with a ring, put it in your mouth, right? So, and we wash. You know why we do that? To remind, Chacham want to remind us that we don't have a Bais Medrash today. We're totally, it's like some kind of like idea that we learn about a Chumash, but it's not real in our lives, right? Says, no, we're going to make you do something that's going to remind you that this idea of Tumah and Tahira is a real concept. We don't have the occasion to have to actually be subjected to its laws, so we'll create new laws just to make you aware of this whole idea. That's mamish the beginning of Hilchot.
If you were in the Bais Medrash.
I'm sorry?
If you were a Kohen and if you were in the Bais Medrash.
Okay, then it would be obligate. You would be obligatory. You would have to.
It's like a shvus on shvus.
It's even more than that. It's a shvus on a shvus on a shvus on a shvus. It's like it's totally created for a purpose. Okay, and the purpose is not. It's not even a shvus. A shvus is to prevent you from doing something that's usher. There's nothing usher here. There's no chance of an isser. It was created in order to provide a ritual that will remind us of the whole concept of Tumah. So when we learn Parshas Tazria-Metzorah, none of Tazria-Metzorah is relevant, right? But then there's on Shabbos, we're going to say, yeah, you know, that idea of Tumah Tahira, we're going to do something right now before we wash and before we eat the bread. And really, its whole purpose is just to keep us in that conscious state that Tumah and Tahira is real, right?
So it's a conscious state.
It's a conscious state.
It's an Emunah.
A reminder.
Of a construct like you talked about earlier,
Right.
that we put ourselves into.
Exactly.
And we do it all day.
All
You
the,
go to mikveh or Shabbos
the
or
whole
every morning.
mikveh, you know, the whole mikveh.
It's not required at all.
Totally not. Totally not. The one time that it's in halachically has the highest degree of requirement is what's it called? Is Erev Kippur. Okay, because that's brought down in halacha. It's also, but it's a long minute. It's only a minute, but it's a pretty strong minute to the point that it's almost required. Okay.
Most of these things are minhag.
Okay, fine, but that's the bottom line. The bottom line is that all of the Tumah Tahira things that we do today are either they were instituted by the Chachamim, or going to the mikveh is basically was a takana of Ezra, so that would be midrabanan, right? Was a takana of Ezra, but that takana was even retracted.
So
right?
what do you mean today? So what do you mean by saying that today it's not shaykh?
It became shy because we made sure to make it become shy. Okay.
So what do you?
It's not shaykh in its original deraisa, but we made sure the Chachamim made sure, and we have been hugging that make sure.
Right.
So I want to tell you a little story, by the way. It's all about the hugging. Most of it is not required al pi Shulchan Aruch, except for the things that the Chachamim mamish instituted, right? So let me give you a few examples. I want to tell you something. How long is this class supposed to go? 12. Oh, to 12. So let me tell you something. I had the teacher, Rabbi Khan. And Rabbi Khan was talking about this idea of how Tumah and Tahara are purely abstract notions, right? They're not unclean soil pants, right? You can't brush off Tumah and Tahara, right? And the only way to get rid of Tumah and Tahara is through going through a very ritual as prescribed by Hashem in His Torah to get rid of it, and there's no other way to do it, right? It's like Gerus, for example. There's no way to make a human being, a wonderful human being, beautiful, the greatest guy in the world, and not only that, from like you never saw in your life, right? And he's more from than anybody else in Shul, right? But he's not Jewish. He wasn't born to a Jewish mother. So there's a process called Gerus, right? Everything that he does will not build up to the point that now you finally got over the finish line in your Jew, until he dunks himself in a mikveh with very specific laws, right, of how it has to be done with chatzitza. It's not about symbolism. There's specific halacha. It's like what's so terrible if whatever he didn't? There's a scab, a loose scab on his skin, right? And that's the only way, because we're talking about a transformation from something that has no physical. It doesn't exist in the physical reality. It's only in the spiritual reality. Whether you're Jewish or not Jewish is a purely spiritual notion, right? And only God can determine that, right? Like Rabbi Yitzchok can determine whether this table here should have been set up this way today or it should have been set up that way, right? He thinks he has that, that choice to do that, right? But when it comes to saying somebody is Jewish, no, there's no, only to Hashem, right? And he goes in the mikveh, and all of a sudden, what happened? Ooh, that's a completely new Metzius, a whole new Metzius, a whole new, right? Anyway, but these are all very abstract concepts, right? Abstract realities. So Rabbi was telling us that by Chassidus, when you learn Chassidus, it says one of the benefits of learning Chassidus is that things that are otherwise very abstract, right, very sublime, they begin to become real. They begin to become very real, right? Very real. So normally tzaddikim, because they are very much in touch with the deeper realities, right? So things are very real. Like I remember, for example, by the Gulf War. Remember the Gulf War, right?
What is it? What?
The Gulf War.
The Gulf War.
Yeah. So by the Gulf War, there were people who were very, very concerned, right? And people who had planned to go to Eretz Yisrael were canceling their plans, right? The Rebbe then was already giving out dollars on Sundays, and people would go buy for dollars, right? And the Rebbe was encouraging people not to change their plans, right? Now on the surface, and you can even kind of al-pi halacha, because b'darkei hateva, based on the natural way things were progressing, it was dangerous, right? People were wearing gas masks, right? Everyone was wearing a gas mask. It was dangerous. Al-pi teva. The Rebbe is as if nothing ever happened, right? Like nothing happened. There you go. Nothing ever happened, says that, right? And people would go by and say, should I go to Israel? The Rebbe says, absolutely, go to Israel. Now, how did the Rebbe, why? Because he was such a genius in geopolitical or whatever? No, because the Rebbe said it's a pasuk in Chumash. The pasuk in Chumash says that Eretz Yisrael is the land that Hashem is giving special attention to Eretz Yisrael. He takes care of it in a very special way, right? So what do we have to worry? So the Rebbe was telling people to do something and get on a plane and go to Israel, right? Which on the surface looked like you're doing something that's foolish, something that's dangerous. Why take chances? And the Rebbe was in a different reality. He said the pasuk says it's Ein Hashem Elokecha b'Mereishos Hashanah v'Adachir Hashanah. This is Hashem's prayer. What are you worried about? Go. Now that would be one thing if a person would do it for himself, right? But the Rebbe is encouraging other people, right? And the Rebbe Baruch Hashem, the Rebbe was not wrong, right? But he couldn't be wrong. He was actually seeing the reality from its source, from the Torah. He wasn't wrong, and we now, after the fact, we see that the Rebbe was not wrong, right? It was, like everybody say, it was miraculous that there were, almost no what's the word? No casualties, right? But the Rebbe knew it all along, not because he was a genius in political warfare or whatever, right? Or whatever. No, because he was a genius in knowing the reality the way Torah sees the reality. Okay, so Rabbi was telling us that we can learn Chassidus. It's about getting you to that point where you begin to see that which is perhaps elusive. It's up there, and becomes much more real, right? And he gave us an example when it comes to Tumah and Tahira. Okay. Now, Baruch Hashem, because of all of the minhagim that we have and all of the things that the Chacham have instituted, Tumah Tahira is part of life, like you pointed out, right? It is. It has become part of life, right? And it is to some degree real. But he said, but by learning Chassidus, he says it takes on a whole new degree of real. And he gave us as an example. He says one of the Acharonim, and I don't remember who it was exactly, maybe the Mashal, even though the Mashal was pretty early, right? I don't remember. He told us at the time. So he was not a chassid. This could be even before, Chassidus had even taken root, right? But it was already, in the air. The times of the Baal Shem Tov, maybe after the Baal Shem Tov. And he had a son who was actually very strong opposed to Chassidus, right? Called a misnagid, if you ever heard that term, right? It's not used often because they don't exist anymore, Baruch Hashem. But in those days, there were those who proudly said, I am misnagid, I am against this new movement, right? Of Chassidus, right? But then, his grandson, his son's son, all of a sudden got caught up with right? And his father was very perturbed, right? Was it Rabbi Kiva Eger?
Rabbi Kiva, grandson of Leib Eger, who became a Chasker Chassid.
Maybe it was Rabbi Kiva Eger, another Mashal. I remember something Mashal. I don't know, could have been, maybe. But in any case, the story was that he came to his father and he was literally like pouring out his heart. Here I am on this holy mission, to be menaged to this new whatever, which was very suspicious at the time, right? And now my son will be becoming a chassid, right? His grandfather, who lived in a different world for the most part, I guess, because he didn't really get involved so much into this machlokes, right? So he asked him, so what is it like? So what is he doing? So he says, well, for example, when he came home for Yom Tov, right? All of a sudden, Anaya Mishagas, a new minhag. He puts his negelvasser before he goes to sleep, he puts it right by his bed. This is not required in halacha. In halacha, you're not allowed to go out of your house without washing negelvasser. But you're allowed to go daled ames. And daled ames, your whole house becomes like one big daled ames. And this is the halacha. This is the way great Talmid Chachamim, God-fearing people, they don't have negelvasser necessarily right by their bed, right? So he said, really? So that's it? You worried because he's putting negelvasser by his bed? He said, relax. You have nothing to worry about. Okay? What he wanted to point out with the story is that he became a chassid. So what happened when he became a chassid? The idea of Tumah Torah started taking on a whole new degree of real, right? It became much more real, right? And as indicated by, what was he doing already? He became a chassid. What did he do? Okay, good. So he did not what he saw in his father's home, or not what he even saw in his grandmother's home, right? But he's being extra careful with something that is like somewhat purely in the sublime realms of spirituality, and he puts it next to his bed before he goes to sleep. Okay, so this is what the Chassidus does: is it makes it all become real. Okay, so here Tazria-Metzorah is a whole new story. It's not just one of these Parshas where you're learning something in the Torah. At least, whatever, to some degree, we can actually appreciate, the more than just this message and its symbolism, but Tumah Tahira, like all things spiritual, like the Ava that lurks within your heart, right? That we may never have actually totally experienced, and when we do experience it, we are very suspicious of perhaps it's only our imagination, right? Guess what? Learn Tanya, and you'll find out it's not your imagination. It's real, just like Tumah Tahira is real. The Haomer5781Rabbi is real as well. Okay? That's the portion that has to do with today's Parsha of Tazria-Metzorah. Did I do all right, Rabbi? Okay. But we do have a little more time. And I want to get into something that's relevant to, that's timely, and that is a halacha pertaining to the days of Sefiras. Okay? I don't want to speak about Sefiras, the Sefiras Haomer, but what is unique about the month of Iyar, by the way, we're 4 days into Iyar, and this point has been pointed out many times, and the Rabbi would focus on this often, is that what's unique about the month of Iyar is that every day of the month of Iyar has a designated mitzvah. Now, obviously, there's mitzvahs that we have all the time, right? And some of them are every day. But no, this is a seasonal mitzvah, right? That only comes around in its, destined time, right? Between Pesach and Shavuos, right? And yet you have every other Yom Tov has only so many days, and the mitzvah Sefiras Haomer actually ends up covering more than a month. But one of those months, the one in the middle of the year, beginning to end, is a festive month, right? Because it has something unique and special, the mitzvah of Sefiras Haomer. Okay. By the way, having something unique and special affects a whole month, by the way, even if it doesn't span the month. We know this from the month of Nisan, because in the month of Nisan, the reason we don't say Tachlon a whole month is because the first 12 days was special because that was the carbon that the Nasi would bring, right? So every day was a Yom Tov for the Nasi, right? We gain from it because nowadays we don't know which Shabbat we're from, right? So hey, we'll celebrate with all of them, right? So 12 days. Then you have, skip a day, the 13th, and then the 14th is the day we bring the carbon Pesach. Then you have Pesach, right? So the halacha says, okay, most of the month, no tachlon. Go to finish off, it changes the whole month. Nisan becomes a different kind of a month. Don't say tachlon already until the end of Nisan, okay? So that's part of the month influencing the whole month. So how much more so when you have a month like Iyar, when every single day of Iyar has a special mitzvah, right? And that becomes a very special month, the month of Iyar, right? Besides other references, Iyar is also a good month for health, because the Aleph Yud Yud Iyar is a reference to a pasuk where Hashem says, Ani Hashem, Yud Yud is Hashem, Ani Hashem, Aleph, Ani Hashem, Reish, Roifecha, the one who heals you.
We have a foil over here.
And we have a foil. He's the malach that brings the refuah to the wall. And then there's other references, Avram, Yitzchok, Yaakov, okay, but many different things about it. Okay, that's all as far as the mitzvah is concerned. But then there's some aside thing, right? That's associated with this time, but not necessarily with the actual mitzvah of Iyar. And there is a halacha that for 33 days between Pesach and Shavuos, we practice to a certain degree Avelos. Avelos means mourning. Kind of like counter, they were talking about how radio is, and right? Okay. But in any case, this is based on a historical incident that happened in the times of Rabbi Akiva. There was a terrible pandemic, right? We didn't have Dr. Fauci, and nobody there telling us we have to wear masks and social distancing, etc. And unfortunately, we didn't have the Biden vaccine yet, right? And many people.
Vaccines.
I'm sorry. So. Oh, the Trump vaccine. I'm sorry. Okay. But it changed to the Biden vaccine. They got rid of the Trump vaccine. It's now the Biden vaccine. Yeah.
They said Avraham.
They said Avraham, yeah. Well,
Here.
not for Iyar. That's supposed to be for Siva, not for Iyar.
They said it in here.
Why?
Because of what you're saying, that this whole month has a Avelis, Indian of Avelis.
It's a minhag to say Avraham also for Iyar. Okay, I see there it says that for Siva because of Tach B'Tach.
Right, that's
Okay,
that's
but
even more.
but you're saying that some of the minhag to say it also for. Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay. So we have this idea of miktsas avelos. It's called miktsas avelos. It's not total avelos, miktsas avelos. And it basically includes just a couple of things. One of them is to not get married. You could do a shidduch, but the wedding should not be done in these 33 days, right? The other is that we do not do parties with music. Okay. Question about recorded music that comes up every year, and that's discussed, and that you'll check with your LOR, local Orthodox rabbi, whether you can listen to recorded music. Okay.
Does it have to do with Tumah and Torah?
Yeah, if it's connectedness and unconnectedness, yeah. The more you want to take it to the abstract, the more everything becomes all part of one big thing, right? So yeah, sure, it has to do with connectedness and unconnectedness. I wouldn't say maybe purity or impurity necessarily. Certainly, that has nothing to do with whether you're clean or unclean, but it does have to do with whether you're connected or unconnected. Yeah, like everything. Okay. So that's what happens. The more abstract you go, you widen its application. That's by definition. Okay, you widen its application by the higher you take it in the realm of this sublime. Anyway, so you have here this minhag of Avelus, which was because of this pandemic. Okay, but interestingly, this pandemic had an end to it, right? And because it had an end to it, the end becomes a joyous occasion. Okay, so this is these days of Sefiras al pi halacha. There's also a Kabbalistic element to it, not necessarily connected, other than the fact that the Rabbi happened to be one of the surviving Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, right? But other than that, on the surface, there's no connection. There was the Rabbi passed away on the 33rd of the Haomer, okay? And that 33rd day of the Haomer, the Rabbi, on the day of his passing, requested that that day should be dedicated as a Yom Hilula. And a Yom Hilula, by the way, is a reference in Aramaic, I believe, to a chasana, to a wedding. And the Rabbi referred to this day as like the day of his wedding. That needs to be elaborated on. A Maimer that the Rebbe said, actually it was a Maimer that the Rebbe said the year that I got married on Lag BaOmer, and I actually, my Sheva Brachas, I actually reviewed that Maimer about Lahavin Inyan Lag BaOmer, or Lahavin Inyan Rashbi.
You got married on Lag BaOmer?
No, I got married right after Shavuos, but that Lag BaOmer, the Rebbe had said this Maimer and whatever. In any case, So okay, so that's another element to the days of Sefira, right? Okay. If it's from halacha, right? So then the significance of Lag BaOmer is either that Lag BaOmer ended, or that Lag BaOmer it was what's the word? It was interrupted temporarily. Okay. Again, I'm focusing now on the halacha. So basically, what do I mean? It either ended or it was lifted temporarily, because there is a question as to when exactly this pandemic took place. Okay, we know it was for 33 days. When did the 33 days begin? Okay, so there's two basic approaches in halacha, and one is that it begins right at the beginning of when we happen to be doing the mitzvah of Sefiras Haomer. So it turns out that on the 33rd day of the Haomer was the end of the, okay? So we celebrate the 33rd day. There are others who say that it happened the last 33 days, right? Not the first, the last 33 days. So so that would be around from Shochet Shiur, or the day after Shochet Shiur, up until Shavuos, right? Then Lag BaOmer falls out in the middle. So even halachically, Lag BaOmer is a special day, because according to this opinion, what happened is in the middle of the epidemic, there was a break for one day. Okay, and then again, as I mentioned, there's Al Pi Kabbalah, the Rabbi, who said it's a Yevulula, so that obviously has to do directly with the day of Lag BaOmer.
What do you mean there was a break?
There was a break in the pandemic.
What happened?
Nobody died that day. They were dying by the thousands. How many people died in the pandemic? 22,000 of his Talmidim, right? So they must have been dying, like daily. There were the Levi's going on all the time. And all of a sudden, like BaOmer, there was no Levi's. No Levi's.
Also a spiritual sickness, right?
Oh, well, yeah, that's a whole different discussion. Okay, we don't have enough time. Unless you want to take another hour. That's fine. But you can do another hour? I don't know.
I could do another.
I'm fine with that.
You paying for Zoom time over here? Yeah.
He's paying for more than that.
Yeah. Anyway, so I just wanted to say one little nikud. We only have a minute left. One little nikud there. So in halacha, it matters whether when okay. So when are these 33 days, right? So generally speaking, is that there are some places that their custom is to do the first 33 days. Some places that do the last 33 days, right? What if there is no custom? So then the halacha tells us. You could choose, right? And you could choose by convenience, right? So if 1 year you do the first 33 days, right? But then it turns out that it's more convenient for you to have the wedding during those first 33 days, right? So then that year you just do the last 33 days. That is actually a provision that you have in halakha, okay? You could actually choose if there isn't an established minhag, right? What you can't do is you cannot burn the candle of both ends. You can't take advantage of both. Say, oh, I only do the last 33 days. Okay. The Shiur comes and now you're into the 33 days, and then you go, no, I only do the first 30 days. You can't burn the candle both ends, right? That's one thing. But then on the other hand, we have the same thing. If a person says, I'm going to be machmir, and I'm going to keep all of the days, right? That could be a problem. It could be a problem. And now here's a nuanced thing, and this is what I wanted to focus on. I'll give you another minute or two. There's a nuance over here in halacha. We know the Arizal actually, either this is what he did, or maybe even what he recommends, is that we do the Bailus from beginning to the end, right? But then when you look at Shulchan Aruch, something interesting. If a person says, I am going to be machmir, right, and I am going to do the whole thing, the Alter Rebbe uses a very severe pasuk to describe that kind of approach. It's called aksil haylech b'chayshech, a fool walking in the dark. Okay? Yes. On the other hand, we have the Arizal who says you do. And the Alter Rebbe doesn't mention it by the Arizal in the footnotes, probably. It'll say it's from the Arizal. He says, however, if the reason why you're doing all of the days of Lag BaOmer, right, is not because I want to be machmir, but here's a nuance. All the days of Tefillah, I mean, all the days of Tefillah. If you say it's because I want to be machmir, then a very severe pasuk is used to describe a fool walking in the dark. But if you say it's because it's a suffix, I don't know. I know it's only 33 days. There's no idea to be machmir to do more. But I don't know which days, right? So I'm going to keep all of the days. Some of those days I'm only doing it because it's a suffix. I'm not sure. Which ones are the suffix and which ones I know for sure? Well, there are ones in the middle that they overlap that I know, right? But the ones on the ends, I'm only keeping because of suffix. It's a nuance, right? Where it's not because of chumrah, it's because of suffix, whatever. There's no time to go into that anymore. But I do want to say just one more little thing, okay? The Babich generally does like the Arizal. That means Biktas Avelos from the beginning to the end. God forbid, not because we're so machmir, but because of the suffix and the Arizal and whatever. So that's what we're doing. So maybe we might be fools anyway, but at least we're not the fools that the Alter Rebbe.
How do you keep the spirit? If you just keep them 33 days, how do you
not 33 days, you do the whole sphere. You keep Avelos.
But those, you said the Piyam is only 33 days.
Right.
So how do you count the sphere?
You go from beginning to the end. And you say, I don't know which ones were real, which ones were the 33 days that I was supposed to, right? But if I'm doing 49 days, at least I know for sure that I'm covered, right? I know I'm covered for the 33 days.
So you don't have to keep only
No. Most of the world, this is the Arizal. Most of the people don't do that. Most of the people either keep 33 in the beginning or 33 in the end. So they actually shift the ones at the end to start not on the day after Chodesh, but the first day, so that they free up 3 days before Shavuos.
How do those people count the sphere?
It has nothing to do with counting Sefiras. Sefiras is a separate mitzvah. Nothing. That's why I said in the beginning. It happens to be that this pandemic took place during the days of Sefiras.
So the Avelis is not shy to the sphere.
Nothing to do with the mitzvah of suicide. I mean, on the surface, certainly nothing to do with the mitzvah of suicide. Suicide is actually a simcha. We have a whole Yom Tif. We have a month which is a Yom Tif because it has a mitzvah every single day, right? This is just the opposite. This is the idea of an Avelis because for 33 days there was a pandemic that happened to happen. On record, it says it happened between Pesach and Atzeres, between Pesach, but it doesn't say when exactly between Pesach and Atzeres. Okay.
What's the Avelis?
The what? How are we doing Avelis? I said that's only Avelis means morning, and it's only by not having weddings and not having music and not saying a shechianu, not eating a new fruit. We don't say shechianu. Not a lot of things, but that's what it's called miktzas Avelis. Partial. Very partial. Okay. The point I want to say is that even though in Chabad, the minhag is like the Arizal, right? And not only that, on record we find that in Chabad, the Rebbe Rashab would actually, even though some people are much more lenient when it comes to 3 days before Shavuos, right? So even the people who keep the last 33 days, they actually started 2 days earlier in order to free up the last couple of days before Shavuos, right? It's like an arbitrary thing. They play around with it because it seems, since it's not clear when those 33 days are, you have that option to choose if there isn't an establishment where you live, or you can actually even, be shifted around a little bit, okay. Bottom line is this is the thing I wanted to say, something that I noticed over my own personal lifetime. There are things that became minhag Chabad. They became the minhag of Lubavitch, okay? And I'll give you an example. It has to also do with this time, because there's a whole nother minhag, which is to say Pirkei Avos, to learn Pirkei Avos at least for every Shabbos between Shavuos and Shavuos, and some to continue, right? The minhag in Lubavitch was only from Pesach to Shavuos. I grew up that Pirkei Avos was from Pesach to Shavuos. And the Rebbe slowly evolved into, it became already minhag Chabad to go all the way up to the end of the summer, up until the Rosh Hashanah. And the Rebbe would speak about Pirkei Avos every Shabbos that there was a Fabregin, even after Shavuos. That is something that I actually saw evolving in front of my eyes. I saw it evolve. The Rebbe would be speaking about Pirkei Avos when it wasn't our minute to say Pirkei Avos, and the Rebbe would say, the Alter Rebbe says, since he mentions in the Tziddur that some have the minute to continue, even though that's not our minute, but that's enough for me to speak about Pirkei Avos, until at one point we saw the Rebbe actually saying Pirkei Avos after the stadium show, and that, okay, that's it. Now this is our new minute again. I saw it evolve in front of us. But there's another thing that I also saw evolve in front of my eyes, and this is a little bit different. So let me begin with something that had nothing to do with the Rebbe. There is an idea that when you set a date for a wedding, not to set the date in the second half of the month, from the 15th to the end of the month. Okay, this is an exception of a couple months, right? So I remember back in the 70s, there was the community is growing, right? And I remember that he gave out a psak halacha that when you did, don't take this into account, right? It's impossible. You know what I mean? There's not enough halls and not enough place in order to squeeze everything into a limited period of time. Okay, so that I saw happen. How Rabbi Zalman Shimon gave up psak halacha. Rabbi Zalman Shimon Tvarkin, who was the Rav in the Lubavitch community, and that was the psak. Okay. But then I saw things coming from the Rebbe, even though maybe not official, right? But I saw from the Rebbe things that clearly indicated a shift. The first thing I saw was Tavshin Mem Aleph. I have a friend, and his wedding was on the 3 days, within the 3 days of Shavuos, a couple of days before Shavuos. This was not the minhag of Lubavitch. Like I say, we went from the beginning to the end. The Rebbe Rashab even writes, and this is on record in Haomer it's brought down, that he was not even happy when people would take haircuts before actually Erev Shavuos, right? A haircut. And here, a friend of mine gets married. And I did some question, or he told me, they asked the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, make the wedding, whatever, it was 2 days before Shavuos, 3 days before Shavuos, make the wedding. Okay. Another thing. The minhag in Lubavitch was that we do not take haircuts on Lag BaOmer even. We do upshenish for kids, but we do not take a haircut. Even Lag BaOmer, I'll be Allah, you for sure can take a haircut on Lag BaOmer. And yet, the minhag of Lubavitch is we do not. One day, the Rebbe comes out to the big Lag BaOmer parade, and you could tell that the Rebbe took a haircut before the parade. The Rebbe there was a barber in Crown Heights who would actually go to the Rebbe's room and give the Rebbe a haircut in their room. Before the Rebbe came out to the parade, he got a haircut. And I'm reading on some WhatsApp groups that actually on record twice the Rebbe took a haircut on Lag BaOmer. Okay. Weddings Lag BaOmer. When I grow up, Lubavitch, no, we don't do weddings Lag BaOmer. Well, guess what? Go to Crown Heights, you cannot get a hall on Lag BaOmer because there's weddings on Lag BaOmer. Absolutely. And not only that, the night before and that the night. Okay. Just this week, a member of our own community, right? This is the first time that I'm aware that it's happening, although I'm sure it probably happened many there, right? If you know the Shlomos, their son Mendy just got married last week in middle Sefiras Haomer, right? Now his father is a Sfardi, and the Sfardi have their minhag of the first days and the last days. I'm not even sure what, right? But he did not marry into a Sfardi family. He married into a very Ashkenazi family, right? And guess what? The wedding took place just this past week on Shiur. A wedding took place, and again, that's the first time that I'm aware that there has been an evolution when it comes to the minhagim of Chabad. And I'm going to say it's especially in the realm of Avelos, of mourning. This is where we started shedding a little bit the stringencies, right? And the Rebbe actually set the record already for the 9 days. Now, the 9 days mourning is a lot more serious than doing Sefiras. It's not mixes of Avelos. There you got all kinds of Avelos, right? In the 9 days. And yet the Rebbe encouraged this, you're not supposed to eat meat. But in halacha, if you have a siyum, if you finish a masechta and you make a soda, you can eat meat in the 9 days. That's the halacha, right? So we know that the Rebbe Rashab would make a siyum, but he didn't eat meat, but he made a siyum. And the Rebbe encouraged that, that we should make siyum. And the Rebbe said, you want to eat meat? You don't eat meat. I'm not going to get involved in that. Do what you want. But you should make a siyum every day. But there's the one thing that the Rebbe did say. You're not supposed to drink wine in the 9 days either, right? But if it's at a siyum, you could have meat and wine. Let me tell you, after every siyum, when I was a bacher and this whole thing started, the making the siyumim, wine flowed freely in the 9 days after this siyum. Anyway, maybe we be zeichet, the yayin, hamashumer, the wine that will be at the soda, the great soda, the soda tzadikim when Mashiach comes, and we shall, the yayin, hamashumer should flow at least as freely as it did in 770. After the siyumim in the 9 days.
Hopefully,
Amen.
we'll have siyumim.
We'll have a lot of siyumim. Anyway, good Shabbos, everyone. I hope you
Good Shabbos.
by musings and the things I had to say. And thank you very much to Rabbi Chaim Itkin for facilitating this wonderful thing.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Deren.
Yes.
Everyone have a good Shabbos, and Mir Hashem. We'll meet once again on Monday. And Gobi's going to be in Texas.
Am I doing this again next Friday?
Indeed.
You tell me.
Enjoy. Okay. Have a good
How you
Shabbos.
thinking? You too.
All the best.